Hello and welcome to the religion class for today. My name is Dr. Nemo and I hope you're staying safe. You're doing everything to social distance and stay well so you will be safe and others will be safe. Okay, we're going to get right into our lesson for today. I hope you're enjoying the other lessons that I've put up. This is for 7th and 8th grade. And I like the way this book is kind of shaped because it's unfolding the story, if you like, the narrative of Moses and the children of Israel in a very profound way. I just love it. Okay. But if you want to do further reading, like I've told you, go to the text itself in the Bible. As the second book of the Bible called Exodus. And today happens to be the day that we're looking at chapter 3, titled Exodus. Okay, very, very important. And I'm going to be helping you, students and parents, to understand the Exodus. Okay, that's a word that means departure. The Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt as a major historical event that shaped their relationship with God and their identity as a people. Okay, so certain events happen in our lives that, if you like, shape who we are and our purpose as well. That's very, very important. So, for example, as an African American people, okay, we've had certain events that have happened in our lives, in our history, that have shaped who we are. And then our purpose as well. So this is very, very important. As you read the Bible, I want you to have this at the back of your mind. We serve a God of history. Okay, so if you look through history, God has been at work. And how does he work? God speaks and God acts. Okay, so listen to this very carefully. In history, we encounter a God who speaks and acts. Okay, so that's very, very important. So in the lives of every group of people, in their history, this is what we discover. And the question is, how do we place the role we have played ourselves and the role God has played? Okay, I think it's not an either or question, it's a both end. Okay, so we do our part, God does God's part, we cooperate, and things happen. Okay, so this is very, very important. So we're going to be touching, for example, on the Emancipation Proclamation. If you look at the classwork that I've placed on the lesson plan, it's going to show you something like that. Emancipation Proclamation. It's also going to mention something about the Civil Rights Act. Okay, those are historical events that have happened in this nation. And how have they impacted who we are as African Americans, our relationship with God, with others, and our own purpose? Do these events have something to point to in terms of our destiny? Where are we going from all that has taken place? Okay, so this story is going to help us. So let's launch off right now and look at this. Chapter 3 begins with that beautiful picture of Moses tending his flock, and then the burning bush, the bush that was burning but not being consumed. You find this in Exodus chapter 3. That's such a powerful story. It's called the call of Moses, if you like. So this guy Moses was a prince in Egypt. He was an Israelite, but he finds himself in the palace of Pharaoh. He's raised up like an Egyptian, but in his heart, he knows he's an Israelite. He finds something happening, an injustice, an Egyptian beating up an Israelite. So he intervenes and kills the Egyptian and hides the body in the sand. Okay. Now, the next time he's trying to separate or stop a fight between two Israelites, they tell him, "We know what you did the last time." And now Moses knows he will be found out and Pharaoh will execute him. So Moses escapes. He escapes, and as he goes around, he's a fugitive, if you like. He's running away, if you like, from the law. This is the guy God calls. And as he's taking care of the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, he sees this amazing, if you like, call it a vision. The bush is burning but not being consumed. He approaches, right? And he hears his name, Moses, Moses. Draw no nearer. Take off your sandals, for the ground you're standing is holy ground. Okay, that's when he begins that dialogue with God. Okay, and then he's called to go back to Egypt, the very place he's running away from, and confront Pharaoh, the very king that's looking for him to destroy him, and then to ask, let my people go. Okay, so we see a very powerful way of God acting through this situation. So Moses spent many years in the desert after fleeing from Egypt, and this illustration shows God appearing to him in the form of a burning bush. He was ordered to return to Egypt and free his people. Okay, so chapter 3, Exodus. While Moses was getting used to his new life in the desert, the situation of the Israelites grew worse. The Pharaoh who had tried to execute Moses died. A new Pharaoh, probably someone Moses knew from the years that he had lived at the palace, assumed the throne. He imposed even harsher terms of bondage on the Israelites. According to the Old Testament, God heard their cries for help and decided to take action. Appearing to Moses in a burning bush, God told Moses that he had appointed him to lead the Israelites out of bondage. Moses shook his head. He replied that he was not great enough. God would not take no for an answer. He assured Moses that with God's help, he would become great enough for the task. Moses raised another objection. He was a man with little standing. The Israelites were sure to ask who sent him. What could he possibly say to convince them? God thundered his reply. I am who I am. Exodus chapter 3 verse 14. Still, Moses wasn't convinced. God turned to trickery, changing Moses' staff into a snake and back again. Moses put his hand into his cloak. When he redrew it, it was covered with the sores of leprosy. He put it back inside again and was cured. Then God instructed Moses on how to turn water in the Nile into blood. Moses still objected. I am slow of speech and tongue, he said. Exodus chapter 4 verse 10. God got angry, saying that Moses' brother Aaron, already on his way from Egypt for a reunion, would speak for him if he had to. Finally, Moses set off. Moses may have been reluctant to accept the role that he had been thrust upon, that had been thrust upon him. Once he had made up his mind, however, he went straight to the Pharaoh and told him to release the Israelites. The Pharaoh wasn't impressed. He may even have had trouble keeping a straight face. Who was this little man coming out of the desert telling him, the most powerful man in the world, and a man considered almost godlike by his people, what to do? He didn't have to think twice before dismissing Moses. For good measure, he ordered the Israelites to gather their own straw for their brick making. That only added to their workload. They complained bitterly to Moses that he had made their lives even more miserable. Moses wasn't a man to give up easily. He and Aaron returned to the palace. Aaron tossed his staff onto the ground where it became a snake. The Pharaoh had his own magicians do the same thing. Their snakes, however, were quickly eaten by Aaron's. It didn't matter. The answer was still no. God sent a series of plagues. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs overran the land, which stank horribly when they died. Biting lice attacked everyone. Still, no deal. 6 more plagues followed in quick succession. Swarms of flies, livestock diseases, painful boils, huge hailstones, crop-devouring locusts, and finally 3 days of complete darkness as the sun was blotted out. Finally, the last, the most horrendous plague was about to descend. Moses warned Pharaoh that God would kill every firstborn Egyptian son. Pharaoh still refused. Moses passed a word of warning to the Israelites, who made a mark with lamb's blood on their front doors. That way, the so-called angel of death would know to pass over the homes of the Israelites. The next morning, they awakened to the sound of wailing. Dead Egyptians dotted the landscape. No Israelites had been harmed. This event is the origin of the Jewish holiday of Passover. That did it. Pharaoh finally allowed the Israelites to depart. A vast caravan set off to the east so hurriedly that the bread they were baking for the journey had no time to leaven or rise. This is why Passover is celebrated with unleavened bread. Soon, however, Pharaoh changed his mind. To their horror, the Israelites saw a dust cloud behind them, indicating that Pharaoh's soldiers, led by fast-moving horse-drawn chariots, were rapidly closing in on them. Adding to the sense of panic was that they had nearly reached the sea. They appeared to be trapped. As the chariots became visible, God concealed the Israelites in a cloud of smoke. Moses waved his arm. The waters parted, and the Israelites scurried across the seabed to safety on the other side. The smoke disappeared. The chariots rushed after the fugitives. Moses waved his arm again, and the waters collapsed. All the pursuers drowned, including perhaps the Pharaoh himself. Traditionally, the body of water that the Israelites crossed has been identified as the Red Sea, which separates northeastern Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. However, the crossing almost certainly did not take place there. The Red Sea is not only more than 100 miles wide, but it also lies far to the south of the logical route that the Israelites would have taken to make their escape. Another possibility is the Gulf of Suez, the northern arm of the Red Sea, which is closer to Goshen and narrower than the Red Sea. But even a crossing there would have involved a substantial detour, highly unlikely for a large number of people who were anxious to put as much territory as possible between themselves and the land of their bondage. Another problem with the crossing of the Red Sea is that some scholars believe it is actually a mistranslation of the original Hebrew wording, which they say is Reed Sea or Sea of Reeds. Red Sea first appeared sometime during the 3rd century BC in a Greek translation. It continued in the Middle Ages in the Latin Bible, and then passed into English with the King James Bible in 1611. What is more likely is that the crossing occurred at one of the lakes or marshy areas that existed in ancient times between the Nile Delta and the northern end of the Gulf of Suez. Some of these lakes were relatively shallow and relatively close to the Red Sea, but no one knows for sure. The only certainty is that generations of historians have debated the exact location and will continue to do so. Classical scholar David Cahill notes, "We should probably imagine this sea as more a marsh than a large body of water. And when Pharaoh, in a change of heart, charges after the Israelites with all his chariots and charioteers, we should probably imagine that miracle that we know is coming on a somewhat less heroic scale than its usual dramatizations would have it. Moses, the true leader, obeying God's directive, leads the children of Israel through the sea, probably a marsh at low tide. When Pharaoh and his forces follow, they are beset by the rising tide. Their wheels get stuck in the mud and they find themselves in danger of drowning. It would be remembered most gloriously by later generations as a miraculous victory." As historian David Diaches observes, the theme that emerges is clear and strong. An army of Egyptian war chariots was destroyed in or beside a body of water in an unexpected and remarkable way. This much must have a historical base. Perhaps still disbelieving their good fortune, a band of slaves had overcome the might of the Pharaoh. The Israelites halted briefly in their flight to celebrate. Miriam, Moses' sister, led a group of women who sang, danced, and played tambourines. Cahill explains, this story of deliverance is the central event of the Hebrew scriptures. In retrospect, we can see that all the wanderings of the forefathers and foremothers and their growing intimacy with God have led up to this moment. And looking down the ages from this shore, we can see that everything that happens subsequently will be referred back to this moment of astonished triumph. In this moment, Abraham's descendants received an identity they have maintained to this day. And remember this barefoot woman, her dark hair having escaped all confinement, singing and dancing on the far shore with prehistoric exuberance. All too soon, the Israelites would come to believe that Miriam's exuberance might have been premature. They had apparently just exchanged one set of problems for another. So this is the end of the chapter. Go on to Ramesses the Great. That's the FYI for your information, and kind of read that to help you know something about this Egyptian pharaoh or king. Right? But like I mentioned from the very beginning, this is an event, a historical event that marked a very important phase in their relationship with God as an Israelite people and their identity as a group. This is very, very important. I know you've studied this in social studies, but this is what I'm trying to do in the Stream Religion program, okay? That as you look at a religious text like this, you can begin to look into history and begin to see the different ways that you can find parallels, okay? Or events that have happened in the United States of America that almost resemble something like this. I mean, this country fought a civil war over slavery, right? That's why Abraham Lincoln certainly came up with a Emancipation Proclamation, okay? Millions of people died, okay? So that what? Slaves could be set free, so that slaves could be considered as full human beings. Now, you know, the African American was considered to be 3/5 of a human person or something like that, okay? Now, this changed the game, right? But was slavery or eventually what eradicated? No, you had different forms of laws that restricted the African American from becoming who he or she was or participating in the life. Jim Crow laws in the South, for example. Okay, so this is it. Until we had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we had Rosa Parks and all the other civil rights activists who fought and marched. You know of the story of Selma, Montgomery, boycott, bus boycotts, and all those things. And it led to the Civil Rights Act. That was also another step. Okay, so these major events have marked the history of this nation, providing greater freedom. I come from Africa, so I can speak about the many African countries that gained independence because we were under colonial rule. Ghana, where I come from, was under the British for many years until 1957. So the 6th of March 1957, Ghana gained independence from the British. Okay, so that we could have what we call self-rule. We could rule ourselves. Okay, so from 1957, 6th of March, Ghana has been an independent nation. Okay, you had apartheid South Africa. Many of you have heard about Nelson Mandela. Okay, he was in jail for 27 years for simply speaking against the rule that was called the apartheid regime. That really was a minority that ruled over the black majority population. Okay, jailed for 27 years. He was released from jail, became the president of South Africa, and now South Africa is a sovereign nation ruled by its own people. That was a major event. And so the question I'm asking you is simply this. Okay, if you look at what happened to Moses and the Israelites, crossing of the Red Sea, the defeat of Pharaoh's army, was it as a result of their own action, or was it God's action? And I want to submit to you, probably it was both. They acted, God also acted, they gained their freedom. That's the same question I'm asking you about the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights Act. So let's look at this. Okay, I have questions there for you. Reflect on it. Let me see what you think. Okay, send it to my email, mnemo@toltonacademy.org. Okay, and then also let's look at the questions I've given you. Okay, about the definitions of the words. Okay, make sure you write down the sentences using those words after you've defined them. Send them also to me, and then I'll mark it and put your grades up. Next week we will have another quiz based on this very chapter. So look it up. Be safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again next week. God bless you.